privilege as your program chair to do the proper introduction for our speakers. So we are privileged today to present a veteran journalist, one that's been associated with national news services, in fact specifically the AP, the Associated Press, and UPI, United Press International. 40 years of journalism this gentleman has put in. His honors include San Francisco Press Club Feature Writing Award, UPI's Excellence in Broadcasting Award, and hot news off the presses. Just yesterday, he accepted 2 awards from the Bay Area Press Club, 2 awards for articles that he's had published in the last year or so. So a veteran of both AP and UPI. When he retired, he was a broadcast editor at AP's San Francisco Bureau. After retirement, he wrote a mystery novel. I hope he'll promote it a little bit with you. Just might take the hint, but it's named Phillips Code, No News is Good News to a Killer. He also works for the San Mateo County History Museum on a series, their docket series. He's written for Climate Magazine, the Journal of Local History, which I'm not familiar with. Maybe you'll explain that achievement when you're here. The County Local History Magazine that all of us, I hope, are aware of and read from time to time, La Peninsula. So he comes to us as the writer of the twice-monthly local history feature in the San Mateo County Journal. That's how San Mateo Daily Journal, to say that properly. And that's how I got my introduction to him. So he calls his feature there Rear View Mirror, and cleverly adds to the name, objects in your mirror are closer than they appear. Clever lad. So it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight, a man who for 20 years reported about the immediate news, the news that's happening. Now he pursues the important things that happened yesterday. Jim Clifford. First this. Thank you. A little slack.
It's a small world. He mentioned the Journal of Local History, said he wasn't familiar with it. Well, he's going to be after tonight because I brought all these copies. And the fellow who prints it is on your board of directors, Stu Hoffman, right there. And I'm sure glad somebody used the S word before I got to it, because it really sums up my career in as far as writing history for the AP and UPI too, because they said, here's the old fart story, give it to Clifford. And I built up an empire around that. And I always want to say to them when they say old fart to me, but I didn't because I liked my job, but I really wanted to say, better an old fart than a young shit. Anyway, I love Half Moon Bay. It's great over here. And there's so much history, and it's really lent to me a lot. I'm making money off of it with the column, but think of all the things that you have over here. You've got, just coming into Main Street, the bridge across there. That's history. It was one of the first reinforced, I think it was the first reinforced concrete bridge.
That's our PR.
That's your PR. It probably isn't. I'll have to get in touch with you before I write my column on it. Going down Main Street, though, is like going down a time tunnel. It really is. I love another place, Main Street. I really want to give them a plug. It's the Paper Crane Press. Went in there today, and you have bookstores. You have independent bookstores here. It's amazing. And the an old-fashioned printing press there with a linotypes. What is even a linotype? It's a hand-set press. It's really very interesting. But I have one problem. Lots of good stories here. I'm trying to think of the columns I wrote. Well, just Martin's Beach. I got 2 columns out of Martin's Beach. One because nobody seemed to know who Martin was, so I delved into that and found out who he was. And my favorite one over here was the anti-aircraft installation. Was here during World War II. I went up to Devil's Slide, took a hike up there. That's really nice next to the tunnel. And there was a placard there, and it said there were 3 women pilots that got shot at during the war when they were towing targets. And I thought, well, who was shooting at them? So I did a little research. 300,000 people passed through the anti-aircraft machine installation here, training. And of course, at the end of the war, it became really important because the kamikazes had I read one battle where they sunk 32 ships, So there's a ton of history here, and there'll be more. I'm working on one now involving the Steele family. You guys know about the Steele family? Well, it's a natural because there was a General Steele during the Civil War, but they had his brothers found out it was a brother and a cousin, put together a huge cheese, big wheel of cheese, and then sold the slices to help the Sanitary Commission, which basically was the Red Cross of its day. And I just wondered if that's where the term big cheese comes from, or big wheel. And I won't say anything about cutting any cheese, okay? But I have one problem with Half Moon Bay. And that's the initials, HMB. Because every time I see that in a headline that says HMB, HMB, it triggers something I went through when I was at UPI. And it's germane now because I think with all the talk about fake news, you hear it a lot. Boy, I'll tell you, that's a heck of a story. How many people here are familiar with the mining barge that was out in Redwood City? You remember it, okay. Not too many people do, but I think that that's a heck of a story. They should make movies on it. Although there was a movie sort of related to it, I'll get to that a little later. But I'd say of all the stories during the 60s and the 70s, this is the one that really stands out because it shows how easily, if you know what you're doing, you can fool the press. Now, I live in Redwood City, and about a mile from my house, there used to be this big barge. I mean, huge barge. And it looked like a marriage of a airplane hangar and a drive-in movie screen. It was really odd looking. But on the side, in huge letters, I mean, it must have been 20 feet up, HMB. You go by there in 101, I thought, oh, it's got something to do with Half Moon Bay. Well, it turned out what the HMB stood for was Hughes Mining Barge. Howard Hughes. Now, I don't know how to explain this, but it was a cover story for the CIA. Howard Hughes didn't say it. That's what reporters had an angle somehow and just kept pushing this idea that Hughes was going to go out and drop this barge into the bottom of the ocean and get minerals out. Now, I just read yesterday in The Economist magazine that people are going to do that. They're going to do it now, and it's probably going to be profitable. But at the time, you go back, and this is where archives really come important, and you check it out, and a lot of people thought this could be done. Well, it ended up, it wasn't a mining barge. What they did was they built a claw, a giant claw, inside that barge, took the barge out off Santa Barbara, I think it was, dropped it, and inside that barge they had to build a giant claw, brought the claw up into a mothership called the Glomar Explorer, took the Glomar Explorer out to Hawaii and brought up a Russian submarine, and we think part of the Russian submarine at least, to get the code book. This is all when we were engaged in the Vietnam War and the war on poverty. God, America, how could you do this kind of stuff? But it turned out that reporters really wanted to buy that story about the mining barge. And I wouldn't say it was my greatest hour of glory, but I fell for it too. And the reason I did was I was down in Half Moon Bay, HMB, underneath the barge, and I went to the guard shack. Well, actually, I didn't go to the guard shack. The guards came and got me. The thing was fenced off, and made me sit down, and I looked around. They said, we're going to have to phone to find out if we can tell you anything. And then while they were phoning, I looked up, and they had all these certificates from government agencies. And I knew one of the guys was a fire marshal. So I said, fine. And I asked him, what are they doing out there? You can be my informed source. Do you know anything about it? And he said, well, I know this, that we can't give, they promised us access only in an emergency. That they had a fire department that could take care of everything. And we don't want any snap inspections. Okay? And they said, okay. So he did it. He said, what he's going to do is go down and get these minerals. So I wrote a story about that. But it was a cover story. It was, and then after it happened, I found out the Chronicle fell for it too. And I found out that there were executives in the news business that knew about this, and they didn't really want a story out there about what was really happening. But it's amazing. Oh, and then, hey, the barge, that's another thing. It'll still come up, and it'll say, excuse me, that the barge was dropped underneath the Glomar Explorer off Hawaii. It wasn't. They took it out of Santa Barbara, lifted up the claw. Only the claw was built inside the barge. Somebody's got to make a movie on this. This is too. But that's where they did sort of make a movie on something that happened to it. But anyway, you'll still see that report coming out that the barge. Well, I was lucky enough for this little outfit, the journal Local History, to run across a guy named Feldman. And he was the coordinator or director, I guess, of all the computers that knew everything was going on in the barge. And he said, hey, that barge never made it out to California waters. So this guy had a first-hand account of this. Now, they bring the barge back, and this is top secret too. Inside the barge, they built something called the Sea Shadow. And it was an experimental craft. The sides were like this. And I don't know how any old sailors, but in the old days, like when I was in the Navy, everything was like this. This was designed that way so radar would bounce off of it, or at least that's it. Anyway, they built this Sea Shadow, which was about, 120 feet long. Anyway, they built it inside the barge. Top secret stuff. Well, they make a James Bond movie, and I don't know which one it was, but the bad guy, that was his headquarters, was in a boat, looked just exactly like the Sea Shadow. Well, they tried the Navy wanted to get rid of the Sea Shadow eventually. Oh yeah, it became so top secret that they built a model about it. A model. Did you show that picture of the model? Now, this is not, I'll get back to that later, but I didn't have the Sea Shadow in there. But I got so much into writing about history that I built models. Those are models in my library of ships that I built. And behind it are the articles that I wrote. And they would get big play all over the place. And it's maybe not the best collection of articles, and it's not the best collection of models, but it's the best collection of both, I think, anywhere. And if you really, by the way, if we have anybody that likes ship models, somebody mentioned the County Museum in Redwood City earlier. They have a fantastic collection. A guy left to them of, really big models, really good. Back to the Sea Shadow. The Navy wanted to get rid of the barge, and they wanted to get rid eventually, and the Sea Shadow. Sea Shadow couldn't pay any buyers. They wanted to either sell it or give it to a museum. No takers. So the Sea Shadow they broke up for scrap. But the barge, if you want to see it, it's over in Alameda. They use it as a dry dock. It's a floating dry dock. They can take it anywhere. You know, and there's a real moneymaker. I think it's Alameda Yacht and Dry Dock Company owns it. And let's see. Where are my notes? Oh, yeah. Back up to the barge. Yeah.
Where's the claw?
Oh, where's the claw? That's a darn good question. I don't know. On what happened to the claw. It's probably still down in the ocean somewhere, as far as I know. Hey, you guys have some great writers over here of history. I just made a list here. Dave, of course, and Joanne Siemens. So she's great. G. Morrell, who's I think passed on. She's great. And one of my favorite was Barbara Vander. Yeah. She wrote on Montera Mountain. Somewhere there's a book she wrote. It was really good. I gave it to a relative, never got it back, darn it. So. You know, I started out at UPI. I cut my glasses.
Put them in your pants pocket.
Blind without.
They're in his pants pocket.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
I knew you were going to have to search for those.
Yeah. Yeah, I started out in the 60s. And, you know, I went to the awards dinner was the awards dinner that Dave mentioned earlier. And a guy named Neil Chase, he's executive editor of the San Jose Mercury. And he really gave a wonderful talk. He didn't have any senior moments. I'll say this guy went right through there. It's great. And he said, showed on a chart, a graph, 1960 to the year 2000 were the best years in journalism for making money and for being a reporter. And that followed my years, 60s to 2000. I retired in 2000, and I've been having a lot of fun since. I'm covering all this local history because I just love it. I'm my own boss. But what I wrote on the history really caught on. But I want to go into some of the things that I helped cover. You say you help cover in a wire service. That means you got 5 or 6 reporters, but usually it ends up the byline who's ever at the scene. There was so much violence in the San Francisco Bay Area during the 60s and 70s that reporters got little rest and a lot of overtime. Enough for me that I could send my kids to the best schools. Well, my wife had a little help with that too. So. I covered Patty Hearst, the zebra killings, the hippie days, the Zodiac, Vietnam War protests, and so many bombings and shootings, you needed a scorecard. It seemed as if the world was falling apart. Notice I wrote helped. Sometimes 4 or 5 news people were involved in a story that ended with only one name, the byline affixed to it. The signer usually went to the reporter at the scene. I saved clips of a few stories below my name. They included anti-war protests, which looking back were a dime a dozen. A piece about the routine prison life of Sirhan, convicted of assassinating Senator Robert Kennedy, and the crash of an airliner in Bay Waters in which no one got their feet wet. I thought that was one of the greatest leads I've ever heard. Because they escaped in rafts just minutes after the aircraft belly landed in shallow water. You know, that lead was written by a guy named Charlie Moore. You know, my name was on it, but he came up with that. Nobody got their feet wet. What a way to catch it. And UPI, God, I miss that place. I was there 25 years, then 15 at the AP, and there was a big difference between both operations. Similarities, yeah.
Why didn't you call him the last frustrated kamikaze?
Don't know. Oh, I see. It was, yeah. I think the guy got fired. You know, we make it Silly Lands and we make a movie on him. You know. He did? Wow. Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Yeah, I think I read that somewhere. Yeah. Where was I again?
UPI.
Oh, UPI. How I missed that place. It was still. People don't realize when that went under, they're bemoaning the disappearance of newspapers. And it's horrible. You know, the important part of a newspaper isn't paper, it's news. If they just had transferred every reporter over to the internet and figured out how to make it pay off, everything would have been okay. But I was down there last week to the county courthouse, you know, and I went into the press room to see who was there. There's nobody there. It says press room on it. The only people in there are some accounting outfit for the county. You know, and they have old pictures of the, I went to the museum later, just across the street, and they had a picture up there of the press room like 1955, somewhere around there. And it's like 6 people with telephones, you know, cigarettes smoking, and jeez. So yeah, people don't realize how, yeah.
Mr. President, how did you manage going from working in UPI style to AP style?
They're very similar. I had no problem with that at all. Yeah, their style books are pretty much the same. But, you know, that's interesting because you said that because almost every newspaper uses either AP or, well, they used to use one or the other, AP, but probably now they use AP or the New York Times. Yeah, that's another thing. The Chase said, I said to him, hey, oh, he said he was dropping. Did I mention that?
No.
No. He said, the guy gave this speech to at the awards dinner. He said the San Jose Mercury News is dropping the AP. It can no longer afford it. And I thought, my God, you're dropping the AP. How are you gonna, you know, how are you gonna get your news? He said, New York Times or the Washington Post will still take them. But they're what we used to call supplemental wire services. People don't realize how powerful AP was and UPI. I changed UPI and AP. I joined them together, called them API in the book. But people wonder where news comes from. This is a good, but it's fiction combined with fact, you know, and so it's historical fiction, I guess, but it covers a lot of this stuff. Anyway, Chase said that they're dropping AP, and people don't realize how extensive a wire service was, at least when I came into it. So that's what I want to tell you about is the 60s to the 70s. A wire service, the idea, yeah, people would say to me, that's funny, people would say to me, oh, you work at UPI? I have a cousin that works at United Parcels. You might know, no, it's not it. And then when I was at AP, I'd say I work at AP, and say, oh, they out here now? Yeah. They think the AP grocery chain. I said, no. But then they realized, oh, you mean the Associated Press or United Press? You must travel. You must go all over the world. Because they'd see, you know, Paris, AP, like this. And I said, well, I've made it to San Jose a few times. But, I mean, I didn't really. I would make it to New York or Washington, but they were conferences. They weren't covered stories. The idea of the wire service was to save you money if you were a newspaper, you know, because you send somebody overseas, you couldn't afford it, you know. So what the wire service did would have a bureau in all the major cities. And they had what they call backbone right across the United States. Figure this out, backbone, and that's where your major bureaus were. Like San Francisco, I looked at like, I don't know, 10 reporters, you know, a bunch of photographers. But then they have smaller bureaus underneath it, like Fresno and, you know, Sacramento. Of course, Sacramento is always busy because it's state capital. But I think there were 5 in the Bay Area, at least with one person in it. I don't know where they're going now. I mean, they're closing up. You know, and UPI and AP, they went at it hammer and tong. I mean, there was real competition for news. I mentioned earlier the Never Got His Feet Wet, that Charlie Moore. UPI was very good at that. They really put a big accent on writing. Another one of his was he was a war correspondent in Korea. And when they reached the Yalu River, his lead was, I shaved today in the Yalu River. Got to play all over. You know, people could visualize him getting down and shaving in the river where we weren't supposed to reach. You know, so he was really good. There were a lot of those writers. And I'm trying to think, I don't think at AP I saw one, I was there 15 years, I don't think I saw one good lead come out of that place, a real eye catcher. UPI milled them out. One reason they milled them out is they didn't have the money that AP had. You know, but I can remember one lead was during the hippie days, and this was in Chicago, I think, or Detroit. And there was a cult called the Home, Om, and they raided a place and they found underage girls and drugs and all stuff. The lead was simply, "There's no place like Om." Really good stuff. And anyway, they lost an awful lot when Peggy will tell you. I really, my heart is still I didn't have any trouble going to AP. I better tell you why I left AP. I mean, I got lucky, Jim. But what happened was this was like in the 80s, and I realized something's going on because the AP was starting to demolish us on some big stories. I mean, really big stories. I remember I got a call from New York, and they said, "Hey, the AP a day ago had a tragic story out of Fort Ord, California, and do we have it?" And couldn't forget, it was a horrible thing. Some of the mother said that the father was overseas. The mother said to the family, "We have too many mouths to feed." So one of the kids, figured he had one less mouth, doing his family a favor. Horrible story. And we didn't have it. And I thought, I think this place has hit the iceberg. Now, you should explain that AP is a non-for-profit. UPI had to show a profit. And in fact, they said the last year that it did show a profit was the year I went to work for, but I don't think they're related. But the AP at the end of the year, if they have a loss, they simply put a tax on every newspaper, radio, or TV station, and tax them, and that's it. It's a non-profit, so they're going to make money, even though they're calling it a non-profit. So I said to myself, better get out of here. So I went and applied for AP, got the job, got a raise. It was really good, but it didn't have that intensity when UPI was going head to head. So anyway, I went up to AP, and some people probably thought I was a traitor, UPI, but boy, UPI went downhill fast. And I really did feel like I was, we hit the iceberg and I was on the Titanic, and it's better get out of here. But I don't want to really say anything bad about the AP because, boy, I really had a good deal there. And one thing was I got to do a lot of history pieces. And I've said earlier it was because nobody else really wanted to do it. But they took some polls and they found out, I was surprised, it really caught on. I mean, it really did. And I wondered, I asked, in fact, they did one, and this is for California only, and they found out Bob Agilco. I don't know if you know who he is, but he's the legal writer for the Chronicle, and he's really good. And he worked with the AP for, 25 years. And they used his copy more than any others, not including breaking stories, like an airplane crash or something like that. Mine was second. And I thought, wow, how can that be? And one editor said, well, it's news to a lot of people. It really is. I mean, it may have happened 100 years ago, but they never heard of it because they're not really teaching much history. And so one of the younger staffers said, yeah, we don't care. He said, I don't care about it because if it didn't happen in my lifetime, it didn't happen. What opened my eyes about younger people writing history was unbelievable. I came in, I opened the bureau at 4 o'clock in the morning. They got doing that later. It used to be, it was always open. And there was a note there that said, General Dew somebody died in Monterey. We better get a story on it. Yeah. Jimmy Doolittle. Didn't know who Jimmy Doolittle was. Never heard of him. Boy, luckily I had a canned obituary on him, so I just pressed a button and it went out. Oh, that's what I want to get back to that a little. I said that why was the AP so far ahead and UPI so helpless? Well, it ended up that UPI didn't have the money to really go whole hog into the high tech. They had computers, all that. But I went to AP and they had something called electronic carbons. If you were a reporter, say on a Santa Rosa Press Democrat or the Examiner or any place, you press a button, that story pops up in the AP office. The UPI didn't know what the hell was going on anymore. When they could go head-to-head with AP, they were doing fine. But after that, they just couldn't do it. And I thought I was in seventh heaven. When I went there, they had all these carbons coming in from every paper around. You could just, really write practically, you knew you were ahead of the game. But anyway, I retired in 2000 and just kept writing history. And I write for something called Climate Magazine, too. We mentioned the newspaper. It's pretty slick, but it's only really got an angle for Redwood City. I have a history column in the back of it. And this I've already gone, everybody should get a copy of this. But where do I get my, do my research? Oops. This has been a real blessing for me. It's the archives at the Redwood City Library. And it's a block from the County History Museum, which really is they have unbelievable. I guess maybe they're digitalizing some of their stuff, but almost everything is Dewey Decimals. They have it, in there, the old cards and all that, but they have a professional archivist who runs it. And the amazing stuff. In fact, I mentioned earlier the anti-aircraft installations out here during the war. They had the copy of the last newspaper of the base station. I thought, wow, this is just a ton of information. Then I have the museum, not museum, but the archives over at the Redwood City Library. They have so much. Well, Stuart knows this. So much to offer over there. If you ever get over to Redwood City, just drop by. They're open from like 1 to 4, I think, Monday to Thursday. They have something called the Schelling's Collections. Now, Schelling was, forget his first, Richard Schelling, yeah. He passed away, I don't know, in the 60s, I think. But anyway, he was a banker businessman of some kind. But his avocation was to clip newspapers and save anything he thought the future generations might want. And I don't know, he must have had, my wife must have been very understanding, that's all I can say. And if you look up, I would say there must be 50 volumes there, just, going on and on. And you can look up family names and businesses, and some of the things aren't to clip, but there'll just be a paragraph that'll say this is from the Redwood City Democrat Standard in 1902 or something. You can look it up because they have the newspapers there. It's amazing. And they're digitalizing them now, which is costing them a couple bucks, that's for sure. But I was in there last Thursday, and there was a fellow who did the digitalizing, and he had a newspaper from 1871 that he called it up on the screen, right? And this is important because these newspapers are just, they're falling apart. You have to really do this. And usually when you put something on a screen, you zoom in, zoom out, it loses the pixels, is that the term or something? Anyway, but this was perfect. Just like it was printed yesterday. And what else do we have there? Oh, they have the mortuary files from undertakers, and the newspapers go from 1867 to 1952, and on a microfilm, they have them to 1979. Redwood City directories, Sanborn maps. Now, to me, that doesn't mean that much, but a lot of people go bananas over it. This is just great. We can find out all sorts of stuff. Redwood City maps. We have over 6,200 photographs. Taxes set, voter registration. The Union Cemetery, they have the index of the burials. And they have the Maurice collection. This is a guy that somebody's got to make a movie on this guy. His name, Maurice was a banker. Forget his first name. And during World War II, when they took away the Japanese Americans to the locations, he kept care of their property, their bank assessments, and all their taxes, paid for it. And it was interesting because we did an article on it, and then people contacted us, I know somebody that did that too. And I was thinking, gee, that's interesting, because all we ever hear is Americans did bad things, that there are good people out there. And Peggy, how am I doing on time?
Oh, okay.
Okay. Let's see. Where was I? I think I covered just about everything I meant to. Yeah? So, any questions?
You obliquely mentioned something about the Zodiac killer, and I think it was about a month or so ago that they resurrected some of the records on that, and they're getting the DNA, and then maybe we'll find out who that person was.
Could be, yeah.
Do you have any more?
Not me, nothing. I didn't really have too much to do with the Zodiac, but speaking of killings, and that's something that brought up too. This just triggered my mind because I'm working on it right now. But one thing I did really cover, and I was at the scene, and my byline should have done, called the slayings at 101 California Street in San Francisco. Remember that guy went in there with a gun and shot? He must have read Shakespeare. What do you say? Kill all lawyers. He went in there and started shooting them all. And gee, I don't know, 8 people, including himself, I think. But anyway, everybody was saying, not everybody, what am I talking about? But the reporters were saying, a lot of the newspapers, the worst mass killing in San Francisco history. Well, you got to qualify that, maybe with a gun, and on one day or something like that. But it keeps, this is where you get it into the computer, it keeps getting repeated. It wasn't. In 1916, a bomb went off on the waterfront during a parade, killed 10 people. 10 people, and it was a huge story for years because there's a book on it called Frame Up. And they framed 2 labor leaders, Tom Mooney and Warren Billings, who lived in San Mateo, so had a local angle there, right? You always got to get that local angle. And anyway, that was, 10. I kept telling people that no, it says here in the Chronicles the worst, and and then they go, and that's where you get most of your news. People don't realize that. Big breaking stories, a wire service will be out there, right? But most of this stuff is just a rewrite, and you don't just send it out, but you got to make it look like it's yours, So that's where UPI, like I said earlier, UPI really did very well. They could rewrite things and get an angle that the other people couldn't. And my wife's shaking her head. What? Oh, okay. Yeah.
Who was Martin of Martin's Beach?
Oh, interesting. Yeah, well, I did a whole column on that.
No, but you didn't tell us who he was.
Okay. His name was Nicholas Martin, and he owned a lot of property, including that beach originally. And this is going way back. And that's another column I got out of Martin's Beach. There's a guy named Coburn. This is like, well, you guys know the Coburn story? He did pretty much what the guy's doing now at the beach. Didn't want anybody on his property. Yeah, so there's always a local angle, and there's always something fresh you can find out that will make something timely. That's why I call it the rearview mirror. Things are closer than they look. Anybody else? Yeah.
The wire services sometimes bring back a phony story after a number of years, and then they'll run it through again. I'll give you an example of one. There's this roasted Rosa. This lady is in Hong Kong with her pet little poodle under her arm.
Uh-huh.
She can't talk to the Chinese waiters, so she says that the dog needs to be fed, and the guy understands and takes the dog, and the
Dog comes back as dinner? Yeah.
Now, that story gets thrown through the mill like every 10, 15 years. You see it, and it's always an AP or a
Something.
it's a wire.
I can believe it, but I don't know how that one happens. I don't. That's the first time I think I heard of that one. But that's, yeah. What I think what happens now, it's in before computers, I would say that would be hard to do. But now it's simple. I mean, people, they should have a course in every high school to teach kids how to, where their news comes from. Because now people will take anything off and they'll read it, and it won't even be AP or New York Times or something. It'll be Joe Service or something on there, and guy makes up, and it's not so much that they lie or make up. I think fake news is a bad term. You might want to say pseudo news or something like that. But I don't think people make them up, although I've seen plenty of examples of people making. You mentioned phony stories in China. This is when I was a reporter, but there was a guy named Patterson, and or was it Peterson? Patterson, pretty sure. And he had been in San Quentin for hanging papers at the term. I think, forgery and all that kind of stuff. And anybody could write. He could really write, see. So I guess the Examiner wanted to do something good, and so they hired him as a reporter. By God, he was great. He went to China and got into Red China and sent back these wonderful stories on people were living and everything under communism. Well, they found out he never got out of Hong Kong. In fact, he was in a bar in Hong Kong most of the time. He got caught eventually. Yeah, you can find that on the internet if you want to search for it. But it's true, that happened. And then another one, the Chronicle. Yeah. Okay, that was one of the Examiners. One in the Chronicle. I don't think UPI or AP ever did anything like these things at all. I don't know. They made mistakes. UPI was UP then. It was United Press. Then there was International News Service. They merged to become United Press International. But First World War, they reported the armistice like a month in advance or something. And the AP got one too. They had a guy, and I thought this was unethical. His name was Kennedy. He reported the end of World War II on an embargoed story. Eisenhower said, "This is, release this at 12 noon tomorrow." Well, he released it early. He ended up on the Monterey paper. The AP got rid of him. But today I think it could be much easier to just repeat things and make them up. And I'm trying to think of some good examples of that.
On that score, how did you adapt to the old manual typewriter to the age of digital and computers?
By God, that's a great question. I can remember the first time I saw a computer. Oh, whoa. Yeah, I went from typewriter. In fact, I mentioned that award dinner, and the program had a typewriter on it. It was a typewriter I had at my house. It was like 1920s. But yeah, I didn't seem to have much trouble. I remember the guy that taught us how to use the computer said, "This will make your work so much easier. Make it a lot easier for you." Well, before you could get it, when you had the typewriter, you typed the story. You'd hand it to an editor. The editor would turn around and hand it to a guy called a wire filer, and then he'd give it to the puncher. That's 4 people. 4 people. So the wire filer would give it a read. Every one of them would give it a read. And the puncher, those guys were inexperienced, I remember. They were the guys that they were usually, much older than some young reporter, and they give the reporter a hard time. And the reporters would cringe, They'd say, "Hey, in the 3rd paragraph you say Joe Jones. Who the hell's Joe Jones? You don't mention." And they did more editing, I think, than the actual editor did. But it went through 4 people. Now you just press the button, put it on there, and hope that somebody reads it somewhere. Yeah, so I think there's as far as a research tool, I mean, God, it's fantastic. I see Mr. Henderson there shaking his head. Got to tell you, meaning small world. He's a radio guy. Boy, UPI had such a good radio system. When I went to AP, I set up a radio desk for them. I mean, they didn't have one. They just put out stories. If you had a radio client, you got probably the same thing as a newspaper guy got. You ever try to read a newspaper story over the air? You're like this. When I was in the Navy, and I think I learned as much in the Navy. I've got to wrap it up. No, you're okay. Okay, I must be getting close to the end here, though, right? I am. Okay. So what it says. Well, I got a lot of practical experience in the Navy. My Navy career was unbelievable. I was like Good Morning Vietnam, that movie. But when I was Good Morning Philippines, and I don't think I ever wore a uniform. You know, it was just, yeah, I went to the base radio station. They told me, I was 19 years old. And they said, I want you to set up a newspaper, and I want you to set up, and then go to work for a radio station. Couldn't miss. But I noticed right off, the AP, that's what we had at the radio station, you know? And everything was hard to read because it was newspaper copy. Went on and on. And there's a saying in radio, you know this one, news from around the world, around the state, around 5 lines, you know, keep it short. And then we went over to UPI. The next radio station down had UPI, and it flowed. Beautiful. They actually pioneered radio writing because the AP, when radio came in, the AP, which had newspapers, clients, and was remember I said it was a cooperative, not a for-profit, they wouldn't let the radio stations take their service. And UPI came in and said, hey, you got the bucks, we'll do it. And not only will we do it, we'll have a special wire to send you the copy. Well, thanks for everything.
It's always with a thank you. A thank you in the back of the room to our hostess with the very mostest. Take a bow, Tina Solomon. And her sidekick, Sheila. So tonight we have more than the usual number of helpers and all. From Coastside Buzz, manning the cameras for the video, it's my pleasure to introduce you to, while I thank, Michelle Dragony, camera person. And somewhere in the room, dealing with hardship and trouble with one hand and setting up our AV in our room with the other, Dave Olson, where are you?
We're good, Dave.
Making eye contact with the back of the room, I'm missing the front. And Jim Sutro, are you our other? I was going to do this little funny joke and say he's our chairman. He's the man in charge of the chairs. Facility manager, and always there, Jim Sutro. Thank you very much. So each of our program meetings start, as you remember, most of you being familiar faces, start with a brief business meeting, and this time we have a couple of exciting pieces of business to deal with. Well, maybe at least one exciting piece and one dull piece. This one happens to be our annual meeting, so it's no surprise that there'd be a little bit of extra business on the floor to deal with. So we do have some business to deal with, and I'm going to invite our members and friends, our audience, to join us in this work. First, we have some housekeeping to do. If you read the newsletter, you know that we want to revise our association bylaws. And the main thing about the bylaws, was the newsletter had them printed, so I'm sure that everybody who saw the read the newsletter was immediately drawn to the bylaws and read every word. So I want to thank you for your attention. So actually, if you read that, you would know that every organization redoes its. Is that the past? Do I have an English teacher? Did that pass muster? They redo their bylaws from time to time. The main difference in this one, other than dotting some I's and crossing some T's, is that it makes the board of directors responsible for voting on the business of the association rather than the dues-paying members. Other stuff, mostly technical corrections. They're basically making the bylaws align with the way we do things anyway. And that brings me to the point where, having assumed that everybody that's responsible voter and member is aware of it, I'd like to ask for a motion from a member to amend the bylaws to read as presented in the current newsletter, described as the proposed Half Moon Bay Bylaws 2018. Do I have such a motion?
So moved. Okay.
I have a motion.
I second it.
And we have a second. So I guess the appropriate thing is to say, is there any discussion? And hearing none, then hearing none, I will ask, I ask for the question. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, nay. The motion, I'm pleased to report, with the cooperation of our membership, has passed. Let's hope the next section goes as easily as that. The other piece of business is about a change. As most everyone knows, I'm stepping aside from the presidency of the association, and that's a pretty big deal to me. And it's done with a whole ton of mixed emotions and a ton of appreciation, I can assure you, for all the wonderful people who for years have worked to bring the History Association to where it is today. For everyone in this room, for being so interested in local history. I thank all the volunteers and the docents at the museum, teachers, the education committee, going to local schools, the committee members and chairs for the heavy lifting of the association, and especially I thank our board of directors, guide us on the work needed to make the dream of the museum become a reality. Thank you all for letting me be part of this hard-working and fun group of friends and enthusiasts. Thank you. So now, that having been said, it's my honor to ask you to vote for a new president of the History Association. And I'm going to suggest that I have in mind for a nomination a woman who is energetic, hardworking, and so smart. An important and successful part of our local business community scene, immensely generous, as I found out, has her hands in so many different generous pies. What was it? Christmas presents for families today. Adopt a family. So she's everywhere. She's also a member of the board of directors for years. She served as our secretary for quite a period of time, and it's with great appreciation from me and the association for her willingness to step into this responsibility. May I hear a nomination from the floor for Robin Kirby? May I hear that nomination?
I nominate Robin Kirby for president.
Is there a second to that nomination? Are there any other nominations? Well, hearing none, Robin is nominated. And with Robin's nomination, of course, it would be appropriate for us to cast our votes, but just in a moment. First, let's ask Robin to say a few words to us. Robin?
And it's only really at this moment that I knew I was going to have to make a campaign speech, and as you can see, I have no notes in front of me. But we bought a house in Half Moon Bay about 7 years ago, and one of the first things I realized was just how wonderful the history of the coast side is, and just the buildings. I'm getting goosebumps. And one of the first things I did was Google, History Association or something, and I found Dave and met with Dave and said, how can I help? How can I get involved? And he said, write a check and get on the board, which I did. And it's been so amazing to see what he's been able to accomplish over the last 12 years. And to just, be at the point where we've got this education committee, like Dave mentioned, and we have a functioning museum in the jail. And if anybody hasn't been there yet, please go. It is so fabulous. And we've really laid the groundwork for getting the barn museum built, which is going to be pretty significant. And so I would say I'm honored by this nomination. I'm excited by this nomination. I'm totally intimidated by this nomination. big feet to follow in. It's like Sasquatch. I was saying that to Jim Sutro. But anyway, I guess I'm asking for your vote. So.
Well, wonderfully done. All that having been said, it's my honor for all those in favor of electing Robin Kirby to become the new president of the Half Moon Bay History Association. Please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Congratulations, Robin. Say that again.
I have to ask for nays, and I'm plugging my ears.
Nay, I will not ask for nays. Okay. Opposed? Not a peep in the room. Robin, please step to the front of the room with me. To Sheila and David, for your phone, a little bouquet to get you started. And congratulations and
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do if people didn't vote yes. Just sleek out of the room. But anyway, thank you. I appreciate your support. You have my commitment to do everything within my power to continue all the good work that Dave has done. And as he said, we have a really strong board, great group of volunteers. Support from the city, support from our membership, support from the community. So we're going to make it happen. So now we're going to go ahead with some general board business. We've just got committee updates from 4 of our board members. And first.